Hello everyone, my name is Diego Alfonso and I'm one of the hosts with the Florida Aviation Network. We are broadcasting live and in the clear from the Aerospace Discovery section in the Florida Air Museum located at the Sun and Fun Complex in Lakeland, Florida. We're celebrating the 41st Sun and Fun Fly-In and Exposition. Our guest today is Phil Lockwood. Phil has been in the engine business and the ultralight business, and you name it. He's been in this business for over 25 years. And we have him here today not only to answer all your questions, most of these questions that you have about engines and fuel and oils and all that good stuff, but also to tell us what the future of the Rautex engine is. And please help me welcome Phil Lockwood. Phil, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Diego. Nice to see you.
Same here. Phil, and we were talking a little bit off air of all the new things that are coming on into your field, which is definitely an exciting field. I've seen this evolve. You know, some people are just coming to a field and really don't know the background, doesn't know what happened before. And you were mentioning to me that the air cam was just about ready. Could you elaborate on that a little bit and give us a little bit of history on that?
Sure. The full enclosure. We've been flying the air cam itself for quite a while, but recently we've had requests from many of our customers that want to operate in colder climates for a full enclosure. And the idea is the air cam, of course, is an open cockpit airplane. So most of our sales have been in warm climates, Florida, California, Texas, and we haven't really sold many in places like Austria or Alaska, up in Canada. So although I wanted it to be an open cockpit airplane, that's what it's really cool, that's what's good about it. I came to realize in the last few years that, we better get our act together and come up with a full enclosure option. And the idea was that you could fully enclose the airplane and be able to take the enclosure off in 30 minutes or less. So that by having the full enclosure, you wouldn't give anything up. You'd still be able to fly open anytime you want, but if it's cold weather, you could put it on. So we started on that project, and we've made a bunch of changes and probably 50 flight tests in the last 5 months alone. And we have a pretty nice setup. We have a system that can be removed or installed in 30 minutes. The first installation takes longer, obviously, but after you've got it set up. It doesn't take away anything from the visibility. It has a full canopy. It's easy to get in and out of. And it allows you to fly in cold weather, light rain, things we wouldn't normally do in an air cam. And just with the promise of that enclosure being close, we have a production version here at Sun and Fun we're showing. We've sold a number of aircraft now in cold climates because of it.
That's good.
Yeah.
Now, we were also talking a little bit about aeroshell and a new oil.
Sure, that's a big deal right now. A few years ago, say back in the 90s, we were using motorcycle oils for the 9 Series Rotax engines. And the reason for that was that our engine uses the engine oil to lubricate the gearbox, right? So you have to have special additives in there for that. Motorcycles, many of them have the same demand. They use the engine oil to lubricate their gearbox, whereas cars have separate oil in the gearbox. And in the 90s that worked great, and then for some reason, which I didn't understand at the time, we started having problems with the various motorcycle oils that were working good suddenly not working as well. And one of the big issues was that they would start to foam at high altitude. Above 10,000 feet, you'd start to lose oil pressure. Not a good thing, right? So what was happening is the oil was turning into a foam like a whipped cream.
Right.
And it wasn't able to lubricate the engine properly.
Oil pumps don't like that.
No, they don't. So it turned out that one of the things that was happening was oil manufacturers were reducing the amount of a product called ZDDP, which is a zinc phosphate phosphorus combination. And that is a very powerful anti-wear agent, also helps with anti-corrosion. And they were putting other materials in place of it. Now the reason they were removing it is because it damages the catalytic converters. And a little bit of it will get out the exhaust, get on the catalyst, and then eventually damage the catalytic converter. So because of emissions, they had to start removing it from the oils. Well, the materials they put in to replace it were not as good at stopping the oil from foaming at higher altitude. Now in a car or a motorcycle, they really don't care if the oil foams over 10,000 feet.
Exactly.
But in an airplane, it's an issue. And so what we did was, as it became harder and harder to find an oil that worked well in our engine, Rotax got with Shell, Aeroshell, and Aeroshell agreed to design and make a special oil for our engines. A lot of testing was done, and they came out with this oil, and it worked very well. And so that's what we've been recommending for years. We actually ran a 2,000-hour test in one of our flight school airplanes, where we went 2,000 hours under flight training conditions in a 912. It was actually in a Tecnam P92. And we went 100-hour oil change intervals the whole way, tore the engine down at 2,000 hours, and the wear was really very little. It was amazing how well the oil worked. And that was a convincer for me, because prior to that I thought, you know, a full synthetic like Mobil 1 might be better, but it wasn't the case in our engine. So, and the whole time we were sending samples off to the labs in England from Shell, and they were actually analyzing the oils to make sure that they were still within spec after 100 hours.
Right.
Well, there's always a way to make something better, right? And we had some questions from customers. For example, we would get some chirping from the gearbox at startup.
Okay.
And that's where two of the friction dogs are rubbing metal to metal. And although it wasn't an issue, it was bothering people. And so the guys at Rotax went to Shell and said, hey, is there any way we can make it even better? And so Shell determined that they could add a little more of that ZDDP additive, which has been removed from many oils, and probably solve that issue and even make the anti-wear better. This is a problem for a lot of older antique classic cars where they have cams and lifters where they don't have the roller cams and
Yes.
they're rubbing, where you have metal to metal contact. And if you go online, you can read quite a bit about it, where they'll tell you if you have a rebuilt engine, or you're putting a rebuilt engine in an old classic car, you need to be careful about using the new modern oils, because you can have wear issues, because they're not designed to deal with that kind of metal on metal contact that a lot of aircraft engines have. So yeah, it's very interesting. That oil just came out, and we've actually got it in our display here at Sun and Fun in our warehouse, and we're shipping it out now. It's a red bottle, by the way. The old one was a black bottle.
Okay. When you were saying about the classic cars, I remember, because I'm a mechanic. I'm an automotive and aircraft mechanic too. In addition, I'm a pilot, CFI, and all that good stuff. But and I remember the 283 Chevy engine was had a lot of problems with the cams. It would eat the cams right out because exactly the same problem.
Yeah.
So, and that's a good thing, because I have a very good friend of mine who owns one, and it's a 1957 Chevy with the 283. And I'm going to ask him, see if he knows.
There are some companies that have come out with special oils and additives, but you have to use just the right amount. Too much is not good for those older engines, and it's something that people need to be aware of. And the that they get an oil with that
That's right.
ZDDP additive for those older engines. Otherwise, they can tear up the cams and the lifters. Yeah.
It's good to know that. Now, I have a question as my mechanic mind. The foaming of the oil, do you know this, or do they have they told you why? Is it altitude related in terms of temperature or pressure?
It's pressure.
Pressure.
Yeah. Evidently, the what they had to add to replace that ZDDP made the oils more prone to foaming. And our engine is a fairly high RPM engine. It's
Right.
geared,
Yeah.
so we have a low prop RPM. And so when you get up into high altitudes, we have a dry sump.
Okay.
So separate sump like a lot of racing engines. And the oils return from the bottom of the crankcase via crankcase pressure. So you have a vent line on the bottom of the crankcase, and the oil gets pushed into the tank. Settles in the tank, and then it gets sucked back into the pump. The problem is if you're at high altitude and you got the wrong oil in there, and it turns into whipped cream in the case, then it doesn't get returned to the tank, and you start losing oil pressure. So, you know, you get an indication before you get any damage.
Right.
You'll see your pressure start dropping, and then as you descend, it comes back up. So most guys never saw it because they don't
Right.
go over 10,000 feet, but for guys that went up over the mountains, they would see it,
Sure, sure.
especially the turbo engines.
Now, there's also some improvement coming along. You were mentioned the fuel injected engine. That
It's a big.
can you elaborate a little bit on
Sure.
that?
They have a new engine. It's called the 912 IS Sport. It's electronically fuel injected, and you know it's kind of revolutionary in the aircraft field because it's all electronic, totally redundant, and they're certifying the engine, so they're going for full certification. And you know the FAA doesn't really like electronic dependence, so they don't like electronic ignition or electronic fuel injection unless it's redundant. On aircraft engines in the past that have had in fuel injection, they're usually a mechanical system, and mechanical systems are okay for certification. So Rotax had to develop a completely redundant system, and they went further than any of the other companies that have put fuel injection that I'm aware of anyway, in that they have even have redundant injectors. So even the injector nozzles in the manifold are duplicated. The lines, everything is double, and they have two computer systems and two ignition systems. And one computer system controls one fuel injection system and one ignition system, and the other computer controls the other ignition and fuel injection systems. And when you do a mag check, it's not really a mag check, it's called a lane check. Lane A is one computer, lane B is the other. They talk to each other, but when you shut one off, it shuts off one ignition and one fuel injection and goes to the other one. It's a pretty cool system. And when the engine's running, the fuel injection systems are both working, but they share the load. So one fires one pulse, and then the next power pulse, the other one fires, and they go.
Right.
And when you shut one off, then the other one goes to normal mode. And you know, one of the unique things about, of course, you save a lot of fuel because it's more efficient. But when you do a mag check, we call it a mag check, it's really a lane check, you usually get almost no drop in RPM. And on a normal 912, you see about a 200 RPM drop when you shut off one ignition, right? So I was asking the guys at Rotax, why I saw one engine where it actually increased the RPM when you shut off one lane. I asked them, how can that be? How can you shut off one spark plug? And so I found out on a carbureted engine, you know, the mixture is really ideal for two spark plugs, and it's getting the best power and burn. Well, on this engine, when it goes to one ignition, the computer knows it, and it changes the fuel.
Oh, the ratio.
It puts a little bit extra fuel in there to be ideal for one spark plug, and so you lose almost no power.
Exactly.
Yep, it compensates.
It makes perfect sense because on a carbureted engine, that thing is set, nothing changes. You do that, but the system doesn't know.
Right.
Whereas the computer is smart enough to say, okay, wait a minute, and then increases the efficiency even though it's just one system.
Right.
That's really
You
neat.
get a red flashing light on the dash. Otherwise you wouldn't know that it had happened. Red flashing light tells you, hey,
Sure.
you just lost one of your lanes. You need to, find a place to land because you're running on one system.
I tell you, man.
we're moving so fast into this technological world and the electronics world, and it's just now. What I wanted to ask you now is about the fuels. I understand there are there's something going around now with the fuels, and a lot of people want to know, especially the road tax owners and operators, um, about the fuel.
Sure. Yeah, we get a lot of questions about fuel because our engines can run on auto gas. So I think most of the questions center around, should I use auto gas, should I use avgas, what are the advantages of each, and what kind of issues are there with ethanol in the auto gas. So the advantages of avgas are that it's available at most airports, easy to get, very stable, but it has a lot of lead in it. So 100 LL has a tremendous amount of lead. It has as much as 18 times as much lead as leaded auto gas had back in the 60s.
Yep.
And if for people who flew back in the 80s, they remember the red fuel, 8087. Yes. That was made for the lower compression engines, like the Lycoming 0320, 150 horse version, the 360, 180 horse version, the I-540, 235 horsepower carbureted version. Those engines, today you can get STCs for 87 octane auto gas. Those were meant to run on the red fuel. And the 8087 had a lot less lead in it than the 100 LL. 100 LL has a tremendous amount of lead. And so those engines can suffer from the same things we do if you run 100 LL and you use low power settings, because they can't scavenge the lead, and they get lead buildup on the valves and eventually stick valves and have to clean the valves. We have the same thing. When we run avgas all the time, if you run low power settings, you don't use any of the additives which help, like TCP, then you can start sticking valves. It's not a big deal. You start to feel it, and you realize there's something going on, and you got to go to a shop and get the valves cleaned.
Right.
But that's one of the disadvantages of 100 LL. Advantages are that it's made to run in a vented environment. It's made to run at high altitudes. It's not as volatile, so it's more stable, and it remains stable for long periods of time. So if you don't fly your airplane very often, it's really good for that. I mean, it sits in there for a year, and I've seen it still be good. One of the things that's happened with automotive fuel today is it's designed to be in a non-vented environment. When you look at modern cars for quite some time now, when you put your gas cap on, it goes click, 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 there's a clutch. They want you to tighten it up as tight as you can, and the clicker tells you when you've reached, and there's a gasket, it's sealed.
Yeah.
There's a vent in there with a check ball valve. It only lets air in so that you don't vapor lock as you draw the fuel down. Nothing comes out. So it's pressurized. And what that does is it stops the lighter portions of the fuel from evaporating off and getting away. Cars, they don't have carburetors, so they're fuel injected. So the fuel stays fresh in a car for a long time. Plus, it's not usually an issue because people drive their cars fairly often usually. But even if they don't, the fuel will stay fresh for a much longer time than it will in an aircraft engine. Most aircraft and most boats have vented tanks. So, like a carburetor that's vented, the fuel is exposed to the outside all the time.
Yeah.
And all the time you have, it's venting off, venting off, venting off, and it's going bad. As the lighter portions of the fuel evaporate off, the fuel is going bad. And so that happens fairly quickly with modern auto gas. And that's why we're kind of the exception with these vented tanks and these carburetors. So the solution to that is you use fuel stabilizer if you're not going to burn the fuel fairly quickly.
Very quickly.
I mean, if there's a chance that it might sit for more than 2 months, put fuel stabilizer in the gas, and that stops the problem. It stabilizes the fuel, stops it from venting off.
Now that creates, if I'm reading you right, the problems that arises from that is like the needle sticking.
It clogs up the jets.
Right.
Clogs up the jets in the carburetor, the idle jet and the main jet, and then you don't get proper fuel distribution and the engine runs lousy. So we tell people, go ahead and use auto gas as long as it's the right octane, 91 or higher for the the 100 horsepower and the turbo. But if you're going to use it and let it sit, either use avgas or put fuel stabilizer in it. If you're running regularly, the auto gas is great, probably the best choice.
One thing, I have a boat, right? I have a twin-engine boat with the GM's, 305s in it. And I was thinking that if you get auto fuel and you put it in there, and like you said, the boat sits for 6 months or whatever. The reason why those carburetors kind of stick there too is like they run dry. After a while, the heat evaporates the gas in there. And I was thinking to come up with, make myself have a small pressure pump, electric pump with a sensor. When the pressure in the carburetor ball, in other words, once that needle opens up,
keep it full. Well, the thing is though, as the fuel vaporizes, the lighter portions, what is left behind is the heavier portions, and it makes tar.
That's right.
And even if you keep filling it up, you're still going to end up with
a lot of
crud in there. Yeah. So the best thing to do is really put the fuel stabilizer in the gas, and it puts a skim coat over the top of the fuel and stops it from. But the one thing that people sometimes forget is when you put that in your tank, it's not in the carburetors until you run it. So airplane, boat, whatever, you put it in there, you go for a run around the patch, and then put the plane away. Now it's in the carburetors.
Right. Okay. I remember one time when you were talking about the gas cap, and a lot of people may not know this. I have a Hyundai, and it was probably 9 months old, and I'm driving around, and the engine check light come on, and I check all over. I tried everything, and these computer things, I don't have the equipment. I know how to do, how to fix, how to do tune-ups and brakes and stuff like that, because I don't need a computer, But once you get to the computer, you can do that.
Sure.
So I decided to take it to the dealer. So I pull up, and service guy comes on, and I tell him what happens, and there's a guy standing right next to us, and the guy finished with me, and he says, if you want, put the car over there. So I'm going to put up the car over there. This guy walks across, and he goes, "What's the problem?" I said, "Nothing." I said, "Just driving around. The car is fairly new. It's got like not even 2,000 miles on it." And this happened. And the guy said, "Check the gas cap. Make sure it's tight." And lo and behold, I go over there and I go, and he said, "Yeah, see?" It went click, click, click. Apparently, it was the first car that I had like that, and I just put
right.
I didn't do that.
Yeah, it's and that happens a lot. And there again, they have a sensor in the tank, and they know if the tank is pressurizing, and if the cap is loose and air's getting out. All it is an emissions thing, because if the fuel is vaporizing and getting into the atmosphere, it's bad for the environment, and that's part of the emissions requirements on the car.
So actually, the guy saved me, because once I did that, I went and started up the car, no light.
Yeah.
So I told her, "Hey, cancel this." So go. So now you know if you have a problem with the check engine light. Now, there's a lot of things that go on down over your place over there. You're very versatile in the aviation industry, and one of the things that I want to bring about is you also have some courses that you offer. Why don't you give us a little bit of background of that?
Sure.
Why did that start, and how do people go about joining your courses, and what are they going to be able to get from that?
Well, years ago, we became interested in training. We've always done a lot of tech support at Lockwood Aviation, and we kind of decided that it would be a real good idea if we started our own training programs. And so we did, and working with Rotax and an operation called RFSC out of Canada, we got together and they made up these training courses. And in the end, we ended up doing the majority of the training for North America. Probably over the past 5 or 6 years, I think we've trained like 800 mechanics at our facility. And so we'll have training classes about 8 times a year, 8 or 9 times a year. And they're specialized for Rotax. We have a full-time instructor who's very good. His name's Dean Vogel.
Yeah, I met him.
And he's actually teaching the courses and really focusing on tech support and training. And so we have a 2-day service course, which is great for a lot of owners. Teaches them how to do basic service maintenance, 100-hour inspections, that sort of thing. And then right after that, they can take a maintenance course, which is another 2 days of training, and it's a follow-on. And most mechanics get 90% of what they need with those 2 courses to do service in the field on the Rotax engines.
Okay, Phil, let me tell you, time has gone like this, and it has come at a time where we got to say goodbye, but we really enjoy having you in the show. And you, thank you so much. My name is Diego Alfonso with the Florida Aviation Network. We'll see you in a little while.